I want you to picture something for me. Picture sitting at your own kitchen table, the table you bought in the house you pay for, with coffee you made in your own machine. Now picture your parents sitting across from you, the two people who brought you into this world, the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally, the people whose one sacred job was to protect you. Now picture your mother sliding a check across the table, a check made out to her for $500,000. And your father looking you dead in the eyes and saying, "Sign it, or we call 911 and tell them you've been threatening us. We'll tell them you're unstable. We'll tell them everything we need to tell them to make sure you lose everything." $500,000. That's what my grandmother left me, specifically me, in a will that was legally binding, notarized, and crystal clear. And my own parents, the people who raised me, who I spent 30 years trying to earn love from, sat in my kitchen and tried to extort me for every penny of it. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I was still the scared little girl who did whatever mommy and daddy said. They thought I'd crumble. They didn't know about the trap. They didn't know that every word they said was being recorded, that every threat, every lie, every manipulation was being captured in crystal clear audio and video, that the scared little girl they thought they were dealing with had grown into a woman who was done being their victim. What happened next tore my family apart. And honestly, it should have been torn apart a long time ago. But before I get into all of that, and trust me, you need every single detail to understand just how deep this goes, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now. I mean it. Don't scroll past it. Don't think, "I'll do it later." Do it now. Because this story is going to take you on a ride, and I need to know you're here for it. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. The stories I tell here are real. They come from real people who lived through real nightmares and came out the other side. And if that's your kind of content, you need to be part of this family. And drop a comment. Tell me where in the world you're watching from right now. I see you out there in the US, in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, in India, in the Philippines, in South Africa, in Brazil, in Germany. Wherever you are on this planet, I want to hear from you. This community is worldwide, and every single one of you matters. All right, get comfortable. Get your snacks, get your tissues. Because this story is long, it's emotional, it's infuriating, and by the end of it, you're going to feel things you weren't expecting to feel. Let's go back to the beginning. My name for this story is Jenna. I'm 32 years old, and I grew up in what most people would call a nice family. Nice house, nice cars, nice Christmas cards with everyone smiling in matching sweaters. But nice is a mask, and my family wore it better than anyone. My parents, Richard and Carolyn, were the kind of people who cared deeply, desperately about appearances, how things looked, what the neighbors thought, what the church community whispered about, what the other parents at school functions assumed about our life. From the outside, we were perfect. Two parents, two kids, me and my older brother, Kevin, a golden retriever named Biscuit, a two-story house in a respectable suburb. the whole picture. From the inside, it was a performance, and I was the understudy who never got the lead role. Let me explain what I mean by that. Kevin was the golden child, and I don't use that term loosely. Kevin was the sun around which my parents' entire universe orbited. Kevin was smart, Kevin was athletic, Kevin was charming. Kevin got straight A's without trying. Kevin was the quarterback. Kevin got a scholarship. Kevin could do no wrong. And me? I was the other one. Not bad, not a troublemaker, just not Kevin. I was quiet, introverted. I liked reading and drawing and spending time alone, which in my family was treated like a character flaw. My mother used to say, and she thought she was being helpful, "Jenna, you need to be more like your brother. People like Kevin. You need to try harder." Try harder to be liked. Imagine hearing that as a 7-year-old, as a 10-year-old, as a 13-year-old going through the awkward cruelty of middle school. Imagine the person who's supposed to be your safe harbor telling you that the way you naturally are isn't good enough. My father was more subtle about it, but the message was the same. He'd go to every single one of Kevin's football games, but when I had an art show at school or a reading fair, there was always an excuse. Work was busy. Something came up. Your mother will take pictures. My mother did take pictures, but she'd spend the whole time on her phone. I learned very early on that in the hierarchy of my family, I was at the bottom. Kevin was first, my parents' image was second, and I was somewhere down there with the goldfish and the houseplants. Alive, present, occasionally acknowledged, but not essential. But there was one person who saw me differently. One person who made me feel like I was the most important person in the entire world. My grandmother. Her name was Ruth Eleanor Kavanaugh, and she was the single greatest human being I have ever known. Grandma Ruth was my mother's mother, which makes what happened later even more twisted. She was a retired school teacher who lived in a modest house about 40 minutes from us, a little craftsman-style home with a garden that could have been on the cover of a magazine and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. My grandmother was not a wealthy woman. At least, that's what everyone thought. She drove an old car. She wore the same few outfits on rotation. She clipped coupons and reused tin foil and did all the things that people who grew up during hard times do, even after the hard times are over. What no one knew until much later, was that Grandma Ruth had been quietly, methodically investing for decades. Small amounts, consistently. She'd learned about the stock market from a colleague at school back in the 1970s, and she'd been putting money in ever since, never touching it, never talking about it. By the time she was in her 80s, her portfolio was worth over $1.2 million. Nobody in the family had any idea. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before the money, before any of that, Grandma Ruth was simply the person who loved me best. Every other weekend, my parents would drop me off at her house. Kevin never wanted to go. "Grandma's house is boring," he'd say. So it was just me and her. And those weekends were the happiest days of my childhood. She taught me to bake. Not the easy stuff, the real stuff. Bread from scratch. Pie crust that flaked so perfectly it could make a grown man cry. cookies that required 3 days of preparation because the dough had to rest and develop and become something extraordinary through patience. "Life is like bread, Jenna," she used to say, her hands working the dough with a strength that surprised you for a woman her age. "You can't rush the rising. You have to wait. You have to trust the process. And sometimes you have to punch it down and start over. But if you're patient, what comes out of the oven will be worth every minute." She taught me to garden. She taught me the names of every flower in her yard, and she told me stories about each one, why she planted it, what it reminded her of. The roses were for her wedding. The lavender was for her mother. The sunflowers were for me. Because you always turn toward the light, Jenna, even when everyone around you is standing in shadow. She taught me to read, really read, not just the words, but the spaces between them. She had bookshelves in every room, and she'd let me pick anything I wanted, and we'd read together, side by side on her old corduroy couch, in a silence that felt more like a conversation than any conversation I'd ever had. And most importantly, she taught me that I was enough. "Your parents love you in the way they know how," she told me once, when I was about 12 and had come to her house crying because my mother had forgotten to pick me up from school. "But their way isn't enough for you, and that's not your fault. Some people have small hearts, not mean hearts, small ones. They only have room for a few things, and everything else gets squeezed out. You got squeezed out, baby, and I'm sorry for that. But my heart is big enough for both of us." I loved her so much it physically hurt sometimes. That aching, desperate, clutching kind of love that you only feel for the people who have truly seen you. As I got older, my relationship with my parents became more strained. I went to college, not on a scholarship like Kevin, which my parents never let me forget, and studied art education. My parents were disappointed. They'd wanted me to study business or nursing or anything practical. "What are you going to do with an art degree?" my father asked, his voice dripping with the particular contempt he reserved for my choices. "She's going to create," Grandma Ruth said, shutting him down with a single sentence. She came to my college graduation. My parents came too, but they spent most of the ceremony talking about Kevin's new job at a consulting firm. Grandma Ruth sat in the audience with a hand-painted sign that said, "Jenna," in rainbow letters, and she cheered so loud when they called my name that people 3 rows ahead turned around. She was 79 years old, holding a sign like a teenager at a concert, screaming my name with joy. That's love. That is love. After college, I got a job teaching art at an elementary school. It didn't pay much, but I loved it. I loved watching kids discover color and shape and the magic of creating something from nothing. Grandma Ruth would come to my classroom sometimes and do guest lessons on pottery. The kids adored her. Meanwhile, Kevin was climbing the corporate ladder, making 6 figures, buying a condo downtown, dating a series of beautiful women he treated badly, and generally being the person my parents always wanted him to be: successful, visible, and profitable. I was none of those things, but I was happy. Quietly, modestly, stubbornly happy. And then Grandma Ruth got sick. She was 83 when they found the tumor. Brain, inoperable. I got the call on a Tuesday morning while I was setting up my classroom for the day. It was my mother, and her voice had that hollow, mechanical quality that people's voices get when they're delivering news that hasn't fully hit them yet. "Jenna, it's your grandmother. She has a brain tumor. The doctors say it's aggressive. They're giving her 6 to 12 months." I sat down on the floor of my classroom, surrounded by tiny chairs and construction paper butterflies, and the world went sideways. 6 to 12 months. I drove to the hospital that afternoon. When I walked into her room, she was sitting up in bed, wearing her own nightgown, because she refused to wear the hospital one. "I'm not dead yet. I'll wear my own clothes, thank you very much." And she was doing a crossword puzzle. She looked up at me and smiled. That warm, crinkled, everything is going to be okay smile that had been my anchor for 30 years. "There's my sunflower," she said. I crawled into that hospital bed like I was 5 years old, and I held her and I cried, and she stroked my hair and said, "Shh, baby, I've had a beautiful life, and the most beautiful part of it was you." The next several months were a blur of hospital visits, treatments that didn't work, good days and bad days, and the slow, cruel process of watching the strongest person you know become fragile. I was there every day, before school, after school, weekends, holidays. I rearranged my entire life around her. My parents visited occasionally. My mother would come, sit for an hour, check her phone, and leave. My father came less often. Kevin came twice. Twice in 8 months. Grandma Ruth noticed. She noticed everything. About 4 months before she died, during one of our evening visits, she grabbed my hand with a grip that was still surprisingly strong and said, "Jenna, I need to talk to you about something important." "Okay, Grandma." "I've made my will. I made it a long time ago, but I updated it last year. I want you to know what's in it, because when I'm gone, things are going to get complicated." "Grandma, we don't have to talk about—" "Yes, we do. Hush and listen." So I hushed, and I listened. "I have more money than people think," she said, with a little smile that was half pride, half mischief. "A lot more. I've been investing since before your mother was born. It's done well, very well." She told me the number, and my jaw dropped. $1.2 million. This woman, this coupon-clipping, tinfoil reusing, drives a car from 2003 woman, had $1.2 million in investments. "Here's what I've decided," she said. "Your mother gets $200,000. That's generous, considering she visits me once a week and spends the whole time on her phone. Kevin gets $50,000 because he's my grandson, and I love him, even though he can't be bothered to show up. I've left some to charity, the school library, the garden club, the food bank, various amounts." She paused and squeezed my hand. "And you, Jenna, you get $500,000. I stared at her. "Grandma, no, that's too much. Mom and Kevin will have whatever feelings they're going to have, and that's not your problem. I earned this money. I grew it, and I get to decide who it goes to. And I'm giving it to the person who showed up. Not just now, always. You've been showing up since you were a little girl, Jenna. While everyone else in this family treated you like an afterthought, you showed up with your whole heart every single time." She was crying now. I'd almost never seen my grandmother cry. "You are the best thing I ever did," she whispered. "Not the teaching, not the investing, not any of it. You, loving you, being loved by you. That was my masterpiece." I couldn't speak. There are moments in life that are so full of love and grief simultaneously that language just stops working. Your heart is trying to hold too much, and your mouth can't keep up. "There's something else," she said, wiping her eyes. "I know your parents. I know what they'll do when they find out. They'll be angry. They'll feel entitled to more. They might try to pressure you, or worse. So I've taken precautions." She told me about her lawyer, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had drafted the will and who was prepared to defend it. She told me that the will was ironclad, that she was of sound mind, that there was even a video of her reading the will and explaining her decisions in case anyone tried to contest it on grounds of mental incapacity. "I may be dying, but I'm not stupid," she said, with a flash of that old spark. "And I know my daughter better than she knows herself." I sat with her until she fell asleep that night, and I drove home with tears streaming down my face. Not because of the money. The money was abstract, unreal, but because my grandmother had just told me I was her masterpiece. And no one in my entire life had ever said anything even close to that. Grandma Ruth died on a Sunday morning in October, peacefully in her sleep at the hospice facility where she'd spent her last 3 weeks. I was there. I'd been staying overnight, sleeping in the chair beside her bed because I couldn't bear the thought of her being alone at the end. I woke up to the silence, the absence of her breathing, and I knew before I even opened my eyes. I held her hand. It was still warm. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything, for seeing me when no one else did, for loving me when I didn't know how to love myself, for the bread and the sunflowers and the crossword puzzles and the stories and the silence and the signs and the everything." I pressed my forehead to her hand, and I stayed like that until the nurses came. The funeral was beautiful. I organized it because no one else stepped up. My mother was too distraught, and yes, I'm using air quotes because her distraught looked a lot like irritation that she had to take time off work. Kevin sent flowers but didn't come to the planning meetings. My father treated the whole thing like a scheduling inconvenience. I chose the readings, I chose the flowers. Sunflowers, of course, and roses and lavender. I baked the bread that was served at the reception, from Grandma Ruth's recipe, with shaking hands and blurry eyes. At the funeral, I gave the eulogy. I stood in front of a room full of people, some who truly loved her, some who were there out of obligation, and I told them about the woman who taught me to turn toward the light. I didn't mention the money. I didn't mention the will, because that wasn't the point. The point was her life, her love, her legacy. My mother sat in the front row and checked her phone twice during my speech. Kevin wasn't there. He had a work conflict for his own grandmother's funeral. 2 days after the funeral, Margaret Chen, Grandma Ruth's lawyer, called a family meeting to read the will. And that's when everything exploded. Margaret Chen's office was downtown. It was a warm, wood-paneled space with bookshelves and soft lighting, the kind of office that feels like it's been there forever, like the law itself lives in the walls. My parents were already there when I arrived. Kevin was on speakerphone. He couldn't be bothered to show up in person for this, either. They were sitting in leather chairs across from Margaret's desk, and when I walked in, my mother gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's get started," Margaret said. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that suggested she'd seen every kind of family drama and wasn't impressed by any of it. She read the preliminary stuff first, the legal language, the identification of the estate, the confirmation that Ruth was of sound mind when the will was created. Standard stuff. Then she got to the bequests. To the Riverside Elementary School Library, I leave $50,000 for the purchase of new books and educational materials. My mother nodded approvingly. Charity. That looked good. To the Community Garden Club, of which I have been a member for 37 years, I leave $30,000. Another nod. To the Regional Food Bank, I leave $25,000. To my grandson, Kevin Richard Daly, I leave $50,000 with the hope that he will learn that showing up matters more than showing off. There was a beat of silence. Kevin's voice crackled through the speakerphone. 50,000, that's okay. He sounded confused, like he'd expected more but wasn't sure how much more. To my daughter, Carolyn Ruth Daly, I leave $200,000. My mother sat up straighter. $200,000 was a significant sum. I could see the math happening behind her eyes. She'd expected more, but $200,000 was nothing to scoff at. "Well," she said, "that's generous." Margaret continued. To my granddaughter, Jenna Marie Daly, I leave $500,000. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I've ever heard. My mother's face went through a transformation that I will never forget. It was like watching a special effect: shock, confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally fury, all in the space of about 3 seconds. "I'm sorry," she said. "Can you repeat that?" To my granddaughter, Jenna Marie Daly, I leave $500,000, Margaret repeated, her voice unchanged. That can't be right." My mother's voice was climbing. "That's more than double what she left me. I'm her daughter." "Mrs. Daly, the will is very clear. No, 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 no. There's been a mistake. She was on medication. She was confused toward the end. She didn't know what she was." "Mrs. Daly," Margaret's voice went cold. "Your mother updated this will 18 months ago, well before her diagnosis. She was examined by 2 independent physicians who confirmed her mental competency. There is also a video recording of your mother reading and explaining each bequest. Would you like to see it?" "A video?" "Yes. Your mother anticipated that her decisions might be questioned. She wanted to ensure there was no ambiguity." My mother turned to look at me, and the look on her face. I wish I could describe it adequately, but I don't think English has the right words. It was hatred. Not anger. Hatred. The kind that comes from a place so deep and so old that it must have been there long before this moment. This moment just gave it permission to come to the surface. "You did this," she said to me. Her voice was a whisper, but it cut like a scalpel. "You manipulated her. You spent all that time with her, filling her head with lies about how we don't care, how we don't visit enough. Mom, I didn't." Don't you dare sit there and pretend you're innocent. You've always been jealous of Kevin, of our family, and now you've poisoned my own mother against me." Margaret stepped in. Mrs. Daly, I will not allow this meeting to continue if you cannot conduct yourself appropriately. The will is legally binding. If you wish to contest it, you are welcome to retain your own attorney. But I want to be clear. The probability of successfully contesting this will is extremely low. Mrs. Kavanaugh took extensive precautions to ensure her wishes would be honored. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "This isn't over," she said. To Margaret, to me, to the room, to the universe. And then she walked out. My father followed silently, the body always did, behind her, in her shadow, carrying her anger like luggage. Kevin's voice came through the speaker. So my 50,000, when do I get that?" Margaret ended the call. And then it was just me, sitting in a leather chair in a law office, $500,000 richer, and more alone than I'd ever been in my life. Margaret looked at me over her glasses. "Your grandmother warned me this would happen," she said gently. "She told me to tell you something if it did." "What?" She said, "Tell Jenna to remember the bread. You can't rush the rising, but what comes out of the oven is worth the wait." I put my face in my hands and I cried. I want to say that my parents took a few days to cool down, reflected on their behavior, and came to terms with Grandma Ruth's wishes. That is not what happened. What happened was a campaign, a deliberate, escalating, multi-front campaign to get that money away from me by any means necessary. It started with the phone calls. The night of the will reading, my phone rang 14 times. 14. All from my mother. I didn't answer because I knew what was coming, and I needed time to process my own grief before I could handle hers. I was still mourning the most important person in my life. The money was secondary. The loss was primary. But my mother didn't see it that way. For her, the money was the issue. My grandmother's death was an event that had already happened. The money was an event that was happening, and she intended to redirect it. The voicemails she left that night told the story of her escalation in real time. Voicemail 1. "Jenna, call me back. We need to discuss this as a family." Voicemail 4. "Jenna, I'm getting upset. You can't just ignore us." Voicemail 7. "This is your mother. You owe me a conversation." Voicemail 11. "If you don't call me back, I'm coming to your apartment." Voicemail 14. "You've made your choice. Don't say I didn't try." The next morning, she showed up at my apartment. I opened the door and she walked in without being invited, looked around my small one-bedroom like she was cataloging evidence of my unworthiness, and sat down at my kitchen table. "We need to talk about a fair way to divide your grandmother's money," she said. "Grandma already decided what's fair, Mom. Your grandmother was old and easily influenced. You took advantage of a sick woman. She wrote the will 18 months before she was diagnosed. You heard the lawyer." My mother's jaw tightened. The right thing to do, the moral thing, is to share it equally. 3 ways. Between me, you, and Kevin. I did the math in my head. 3 ways would mean roughly $250,000 each, which would mean I'd be giving up half my inheritance and my mother would be getting an extra $50,000 on top of her own $200,000. "Mom, Grandma left you $200,000. She left Kevin $50,000. She made her decisions for her own reasons. Her reasons were wrong. The volume of her voice in my small apartment was shocking. It bounced off the walls and hit me in the chest. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out. I'm not having this conversation today. I buried my grandmother 4 days ago, and I haven't even had the chance to grieve because you've been calling me every 5 minutes about money." She stood up, and she said something that I carry with me to this day. "Your grandmother should have left everything to me. I was her daughter. You're just the granddaughter. You were always just the granddaughter. Don't forget your place, Jenna." My place. She'd been putting me in my place for 30 years, below Kevin, below her, below everyone. And she was still doing it, even now, even with Grandma Ruth barely cold in the ground. She left, and I locked the door behind her and slid down to the floor. God, I seem to end up on floors a lot in moments like this. And I sat there and thought about what my grandmother had said. "I know what they'll do. They'll be angry. They might try to pressure you, or worse." Or worse. Grandma Ruth had known. She'd known, and she'd tried to prepare me. I just didn't realize how bad the worse would get. Over the next several weeks, my parents deployed a strategy that was so coordinated it almost felt rehearsed. Looking back, I think it was rehearsed. I think they sat at their kitchen table and planned it like a military operation. Phase 1, the guilt trip. My mother called me daily, sometimes multiple times a day, with variations of the same speech. She talked about how hard she'd worked to raise me, how much she'd sacrificed, how ungrateful I was, how Grandma Ruth would be ashamed of me for not sharing. The irony of invoking Grandma Ruth's name, a woman who had deliberately chosen to give me the largest share because she knew how my parents treated me, was not lost on me. But pointing out that irony only made my mother angrier. Phase 2, the family pressure. Kevin got involved. Not voluntarily. I'm pretty sure my mother enlisted him. He called me from his downtown condo, where he was probably sitting on a couch that cost more than my car, and he said, "Jenna, just give Mom some of the money. It's not worth the drama. You know how she gets." "Kevin, Grandma gave me that money for a reason." "Yeah, because you were her favorite. We all know that. But being the favorite doesn't mean you get to screw the rest of us." "I'm not screwing anyone. Grandma decided—" "Grandma was an old lady who probably felt guilty about not giving you enough attention or whatever. Just split it and move on." "You got $50,000, Kevin. You make $180,000 a year. You don't need more." He hung up on me. Phase 3, the flying monkeys. My parents started contacting other family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, and telling a version of the story that bore almost no resemblance to reality. In their version, I had manipulated a dying old woman into changing her will. I was greedy and selfish. I was tearing the family apart. I started getting calls from relatives I barely spoke to. "Jenna, I heard about the situation with your grandmother's will. Don't you think the right thing to do would be to share?" "Jenna, your mother is devastated. Can't you see what this is doing to her?" "Jenna, family is more important than money." Family is more important than money. That's what they said. And yet, every single one of them was calling me about the money. None of them called to ask how I was doing. None of them called to say they were sorry about Grandma Ruth. None of them called to acknowledge that I had lost the person I loved most in this world. They called about the money, only the money, always the money. Phase 4, the threats. This is where it got dark. About 6 weeks after the will reading, my father called me. My father, the man who rarely said more than 10 words to me in a given week. He called, and his voice was different. Not angry like my mother's, cold, calculated. "Jenna, your mother and I have been talking to a lawyer." My stomach dropped. "We believe the will can be contested on the grounds that your grandmother was not of sound mind and that you exerted undue influence over her." "Dad, she was examined by 2 doctors." "Doctors can be wrong, and the amount of time you spent with her in her final months, a jury might find that suspicious." "Suspicious? I was taking care of her because you weren't there, because Mom came once a week and Kevin came twice in 8 months." "Lower your voice, Jenna." Always that. Always my volume. Never the content of what I was saying. Never the truth of it. Just be quieter. Be smaller. Know your place. "We prefer not to go to court," he continued. "It would be expensive and public, so we're proposing a compromise. You sign over $300,000 to your mother. You keep $200,000. That's still a lot of money for someone in your position." My position. A school teacher. A nobody. Someone who should be grateful for scraps. "No," I said. "Jenna, no. Grandma Ruth left me $500,000 because she wanted me to have it. She spent 18 months making sure that her wishes were legally protected. I am not signing over a single cent." "You'll regret this," he said, and he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time after that call, and for the first time, I felt genuinely afraid. Not afraid of losing the money, afraid of what my parents might do to take it. 3 months after Grandma Ruth's death, 2 months after the will reading, 6 weeks of escalating pressure, guilt trips, family manipulation, and legal threats. And then came the day that changed everything. My parents called and said they wanted to come over to talk. My mother's voice on the phone was eerily calm, the kind of calm that a storm has in its eye. I knew something was different about this visit. But what I didn't tell them, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I'd been preparing. See, after my father's phone call about the lawyers, I'd called Margaret Chen. I told her about the threats, the pressure, the escalation. And Margaret, bless her, said something that crystallized everything. "Jenna, based on what you're describing, your parents' behavior is crossing the line from family disagreement into potential coercion and extortion. I strongly recommend you document everything from this point forward." So I did. I installed a security camera in my living room, a small one, positioned on a bookshelf angled toward the kitchen table. It looked like a decorative object. You'd never notice it if you weren't looking for it. I also downloaded a voice recording app on my phone, and I started recording every phone call. In my state, one-party consent was the law, meaning I was legally allowed to record any conversation I was part of without the other party's knowledge. I documented the voicemails, screenshot the texts, saved the emails, created a folder on my computer, and backed it up to the cloud. I was building a case. Not because I wanted to take my parents to court, the thought made me physically ill, but because I had a feeling in my gut, the same gut feeling that tells you to lock your car door or cross to the other side of the street. Something bad was coming, and I needed to be ready. The morning of the visit, I turned on the camera. I opened the recording app on my phone and placed it on the kitchen counter, screen down, like it was just sitting there charging. And then I made coffee and waited. They arrived at 10 a.m. My mother was wearing a blazer, which was unusual for a casual family visit. My father was carrying a folder. A folder. They sat at my kitchen table, the table I ate my meals at, the table where I graded my students' artwork, the table where I sat and missed my grandmother every single day. And my mother folded her hands and put on what I can only describe as her church face. Serene, composed, righteous. "Jenna," she began, "your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking and praying." Oh, they were bringing God into it now. Of course they were. "We believe that your grandmother's will does not reflect her true intentions. We believe that she was confused and that you," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "spent a great deal of time with her during a vulnerable period, and that your influence may have affected her judgment." I said nothing. I let her talk. Because the camera was rolling and the recorder was running, and I needed her to say everything she was going to say. My father opened the folder. Inside was a check, a personal check already made out, with my mother's name on the "pay to the order of" line. The amount was blank, but someone had written, in pencil, erasable, $500,000. $500,000. The entire inheritance. Not the $300,000 they'd previously demanded. All of it. "We need you to sign this," my father said. I stared at the check. Then I looked up at him. Then at my mother. "You want me to sign over my entire inheritance? Not part of it. All of it." "Your grandmother's money should have come to me," my mother said, her composure starting to slip. "I am her daughter. I am her next of kin. Whatever she was thinking when she wrote that will, it was wrong, and you know it." "I'm not signing that check, Mom." And that's when my father said it. He leaned forward, his eyes. I'd never noticed how cold they were before, but they were cold, like river stones, fixed on mine, and he said, "Sign the check, Jenna." "No." "Sign it, or we call 911. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. "What?" "You heard me. Sign the check or we pick up the phone and call the police. We tell them you've been threatening us, that you've been aggressive, unstable. Your mother will tell them she's afraid for her safety. We have a family friend who's a psychiatrist. He'll provide a statement that raises concerns about your mental state." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I genuinely, physically could not process the words coming out of my father's mouth. You're going to lie to the police? You're going to fabricate a mental health crisis? To steal money from your own daughter?" My mother jumped in. "It's not stealing when it should have been ours in the first place. We're correcting a mistake. Your grandmother made a mistake and we're fixing it." "A mistake. Leaving me money was a mistake." "You're a school teacher, Jenna. You make $42,000 a year. What are you going to do with $500,000? Waste it? At least with US, the money would be used responsibly. For the family." For the family. The family that never showed up. The family that forgot to pick me up from school. The family that checked their phones at funerals. The family that considered me an afterthought for 30 years. That family. "And if you think about contesting this or going to a lawyer," my father continued, "remember, we know people. We know people at your school. We know your principal. How would it look if there were questions about your mental stability? You work with children, Jenna. How quickly do you think they'd put you on leave if we raised concerns?" There it was. Not just the money. They were threatening my job, my career, the thing I'd built, the work I loved, the children who depended on me. They were threatening to destroy my life if I didn't hand over every cent my grandmother had left me. And the camera caught every word, and the recorder caught every syllable. I looked at my parents, these two people who had given me life and then spent 30 years making me feel like it wasn't worth much. And something shifted inside me. Something that had been bending for 3 decades finally, quietly, decisively snapped. Not in the dramatic, explosive way, in the still way, the way a foundation cracks before a building falls. "I need a minute," I said. "Let me think about it." My mother's eyes lit up. She thought she'd won. "Take your time, honey," she said, her voice suddenly dripping with maternal sweetness. "We know this is a lot. We just want what's best for the family." I went to my bedroom. I closed the door, and I called Margaret Chen. She answered on the second ring. "Margaret, they're in my apartment right now. They brought a check. They're threatening to call the police and file a false report. They're threatening my job. I have it all on camera." "Jenna," Margaret said, and her voice was the voice of someone who has been waiting for exactly this moment. "Do not sign anything. Walk back in there, tell them you need more time, and get them out of your apartment. Then send me every second of that footage. We're going to end this." I took a breath. I splashed cold water on my face, and I walked back out to the kitchen. "I'm not ready to make a decision today," I said calmly. "I need a few days to think about it." My mother's sweetness evaporated. "You don't have a few days, Jenna. We need an answer now." "Then the answer is no. But I'm giving you the courtesy of a few days to reconsider your approach before I respond formally." My father's eyes narrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means you should leave my apartment now." There was a standoff. 10 seconds that felt like 10 minutes. My mother's face was red. My father's jaw was clenched. I stood my ground, my hands trembling at my sides, but my voice steady. Finally, my mother grabbed her purse and stood. "You have until Friday," she said. "After that, we make the calls." And they left. I locked the door. I sat down, and I shook. My entire body shook like I'd been in a car accident. The adrenaline, the fear, the rage, the grief, it all hit at once, a tidal wave of everything I'd been holding back for months. But beneath the shaking, beneath the fear, there was something else. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I sent Margaret the footage that evening. All of it. The video from the kitchen camera, the audio from the phone recordings, the saved voicemails, texts, and emails from the past 2 months. Margaret called me the next morning. "Jenna, I've reviewed everything. What your parents did in your apartment constitutes attempted extortion and coercion. The threat to file a false police report is itself a crime. The threat to interfere with your employment is actionable. This is not a family dispute anymore. This is criminal behavior." She paused. "What do you want to do?" I thought about it, really thought about it, because despite everything, despite the threats, the manipulation, the cruelty, these were my parents. The word parents still carried weight, even when the people behind it didn't deserve it. "I want them to stop," I said. "I want them to leave me alone. I want to keep my grandmother's money and live my life without looking over my shoulder. And if they don't stop, then I want them to face consequences." Margaret nodded. I couldn't see her, but I could hear the nod. Here's what I recommend. We send them a formal letter from my office on my letterhead, informing them that their actions have been documented, that we have video and audio evidence of their attempted extortion, and that if they continue their behavior or make any attempt to file false reports or interfere with your employment, we will pursue criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. Will that work? For most people, yes. The threat of criminal prosecution is a very effective deterrent. For people with the kind of ego your parents have, people who care about appearances above all else, the threat of public criminal charges is even more effective. Margaret drafted the letter. It was 3 pages long, and it was devastating. Legal precision meets emotional devastation. It outlined every threat, every coercive statement, every manipulative tactic, with timestamps and references to the recorded evidence. The letter included a still image from the kitchen camera, my parents sitting at my table with the check between them, my father's finger pointing at me. It also included a transcription of my father's exact words. Sign the check or we call 911. At the bottom of the letter was a simple statement. My client has no desire to pursue legal action against her own parents. However, she is prepared to do so, including filing criminal complaints for attempted extortion, coercion, and conspiracy to file a false police report, if this behavior does not cease immediately and permanently. Margaret sent the letter on a Wednesday, via certified mail requiring a signature. And then we waited. Thursday came and went. Nothing. Friday, the day my mother had given me as her deadline, came and went. Nothing. No calls, no texts, no threats. Saturday morning, my phone rang. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was short, and her voice was completely different from anything I'd heard before. Not angry, not cold, not manipulative. Scared. Jenna, we got the letter from your lawyer. I need to talk to you. Please call me back. I didn't call back, not because I was being petty, but because Margaret had advised me that all further communication should go through her. On Monday, my parents' lawyer, they'd retained someone, a man named Douglas Pratt, contacted Margaret. The conversation, as Margaret relayed it to me, went something like this. Douglas, my clients want to resolve this matter privately. They're willing to agree to cease all contact regarding the inheritance. Margaret, that's a start, but given the severity of the threats made, my client requires a formal, signed agreement. Your clients will agree in writing to 1. Cease all contact with my client regarding the inheritance. 2. Make no attempts to contest the will. 3. Make no contact with my client's employer. 4. Make no false reports to law enforcement. 5. Acknowledge in writing that their behavior was inappropriate and coercive. In exchange, my client will not file criminal charges. Douglas, the acknowledgement might be difficult for my clients. Margaret, not as difficult as a criminal trial. They signed, both of them. My mother and my father signed a legally binding agreement acknowledging that their behavior was coercive and inappropriate and agreeing to every one of Margaret's terms. When Margaret called to tell me it was done, I don't know what I felt. Relief, yes. Triumph, a little. But mostly just a profound, aching sadness because I'd won. But what had I won? A legal battle against my own parents. An agreement that basically said, your mother and father will now leave you alone. That was the prize. being left alone by the people who were supposed to hold you closest. Some victories don't feel like victories, they feel like funerals. My parents kept their word. Legally, they had no choice. But the silence that followed was its own kind of punishment. I didn't hear from my mother for 3 months. Not a call, not a text, not a birthday card. My birthday fell during that period, and for the first time in my life, my own mother didn't acknowledge it. Not even a text, not even a happy birthday through gritted teeth. Kevin called me once, about a month after the agreement was signed. "What did you do?" he demanded. "Mom is a wreck. She won't stop crying. Dad won't talk about it. What the hell did you do, Jenna?" I protected myself, Kevin. From what? From your own parents? Yes, from my own parents, who tried to extort me, who threatened to call the police and lie, who threatened to get me fired from my job. Silence on the line. They wouldn't do that. They did do that. I have it on video. More silence. You recorded them? I recorded people committing a crime in my home. Yes. That's that's messed up, Jenna. Recording your own parents. What's messed up, Kevin, is that I had to. He didn't have anything to say to that. He muttered something about the family being destroyed and hung up. The family being destroyed. As if it was something I had done, rather than something that had been done to me by them for my entire life. I'd like to tell you that the extended family rallied around me. They didn't. The narrative my parents had spun was too entrenched. Most of my relatives had already decided I was the villain, the greedy granddaughter who stole from a dying woman and then turned on her own parents. I got a letter from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister, that said, and I quote, "What you've done to your mother is unforgivable. She carried you for 9 months. She raised you. And this is how you repay her? You should be ashamed." She carried me for 9 months, as if pregnancy was a debt I'd been repaying my whole life and still hadn't settled. I stopped reading the letters after that. I stopped answering calls from family members. I let the silence settle around me like snow, cold but clean. And slowly, carefully, I started to rebuild. I want to talk about the money now, because this story isn't just about theft and betrayal. It's about what happens when someone's love manifests as a gift, and you honor that gift by using it the way they intended. Grandma Ruth didn't leave me $500,000 so I could buy a fancy car or take expensive vacations. I knew that. She left it so I could build a life that reflected my true self, the self she'd always seen, even when no one else did. Here's what I did with the money. First, I paid off my student loans, all of them, every last cent of the debt that had been hanging over me since college, making me feel like I was running on a treadmill that never stopped. Gone, done, free. The relief of that alone was staggering. If you've ever carried student debt, you know what I mean. It's not just financial weight, it's emotional weight. It's a constant whisper that says, you're behind, you'll never catch up." And suddenly, in one payment, that whisper went silent. Second, I put a down payment on a small house. Not a mansion, not anything extravagant. A 2-bedroom craftsman, similar in style to Grandma Ruth's house, with a little garden and good light. I planted sunflowers in the front yard. Third, I set aside money for a proper studio. I converted the spare bedroom into a painting space and invested in quality supplies, good canvases, professional grade paints, proper lighting. Fourth, and this is the one that would have made Grandma Ruth the proudest, I established a small scholarship fund at the school where I teach, the Ruth Kavanaugh Art Scholarship. Every year, it provides art supplies, class fees, and mentorship for 3 students who show artistic promise, but whose families can't afford to support their talent. The first year, one of the recipients was a quiet, shy girl named Maya, who reminded me so much of myself at that age that I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to cry. She was talented, overlooked, and convinced that her art didn't matter. I knelt down next to her desk and said, "God put something special in those hands, Maya. Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Grandma Ruth's words, living on, through me, through Maya, through every kid who picks up a brush and dares to believe that creating something beautiful is worth their time. I invested the rest conservatively, the way Grandma Ruth would have wanted. I wasn't trying to get rich. I was trying to build a foundation, a stable, secure foundation that would allow me to live my life without fear, without dependency, without anyone ever being able to hold money over my head again. And it worked. For the first time in my life, I felt secure. Not wealthy, secure. There's a difference, and it's enormous. Wealth is about accumulation. Security is about peace. And peace was all I'd ever wanted. 8 months after the legal agreement. 8 months of silence. 8 months of learning to live without the family I'd always had, but never truly belonged to. A letter arrived, handwritten. My mother's handwriting, that distinctive, slightly slanted cursive that I'd grown up seeing on grocery lists and birthday cards, and the passive-aggressive notes she'd leave on the refrigerator. I almost threw it away. But I didn't, because hope is a stubborn, foolish, beautiful thing that refuses to die even when you beg it to. I opened it. Dear Jenna, I have started this letter 14 times. I've thrown away 13 versions because they were all wrong. They were full of excuses and justifications but you have to understand. And I realized that none of that is what you need to hear. What you need to hear is this: I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what your father and I did in your kitchen. I'm sorry for the threats. I'm sorry for the phone calls and the guilt trips and the family members I enlisted to pressure you. I'm sorry for all of it. But I need to be sorry for more than just the money situation, because the money situation didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because of 30 years of choices I made that told you, over and over, that you were less important than your brother, less valuable than our image, less worthy of attention and love and presence. I've been seeing a therapist. Your father won't go, but I'm going, and she's been helping me understand some things I didn't want to understand. Like the fact that I was jealous of you and my mother. I know that sounds strange, a mother jealous of her own daughter's relationship with her grandmother, but it's true. My mother and we were never close, not the way she was with you. She loved me, I know that, but she didn't like me, not the way she liked you. She didn't light up when I walked into a room the way she lit up when you did. She didn't call me her sunflower, or plant flowers in my name, or hold signs at my graduation. And instead of recognizing that as my failure to show up, my failure to be present, my failure to be the kind of daughter she could connect with, I blamed you. I told myself you had stolen her from me. I told myself you had manipulated her. Because that was easier than admitting that I'd lost her all on my own. When she left you the money, more than she left me. It confirmed every insecure, jealous thought I'd ever had. It was proof in black and white that my own mother loved my daughter more than she loved me, and I couldn't handle it. So I tried to take it from you, because if I had the money, maybe it would mean she loved me more after all. I know how irrational that sounds. It is irrational. But grief and jealousy don't follow logic. They follow pain. I'm not writing this to ask for forgiveness. I don't think I've earned that yet, and I may never earn it. I'm writing because my therapist says that accountability is the first step toward change, and I want to change. I want to be the mother I should have been. I don't know if it's too late for that. It might be. But I want you to know that I see you now, Jenna. Not as Kevin's sister, not as my mother's favorite, not as the quiet girl who needed to try harder. I see you. And what I see is a woman who is strong and good and brave and kind. Everything my mother said you were. Everything I was too blind and too jealous to see for myself. I love you. I know those words might feel hollow after everything, but they're true. I love you imperfectly, insufficiently, and belatedly, but I love you. I planted sunflowers in my garden this spring. They made me think of you. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. If you don't, I understand. Your mother, Carolyn. I read that letter 11 times. I sat with it at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd tried to extort me, and I read it 11 times, and each time I found something new. A phrase that stung, a sentence that healed, a word that opened a door I thought was permanently closed. I didn't respond right away. I needed time. I needed to sit with the complexity of loving someone who had hurt you deeply and who was now, for the first time, taking genuine responsibility for that hurt. My therapist, yes, I'd started seeing one too, helped me process it. She said something I think about a lot. Forgiveness isn't a single event, Jenna. It's a process. And it doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone and still maintain boundaries. You can acknowledge their growth and still protect your peace. Those things aren't contradictions. They're wisdom. A month after receiving the letter, I wrote back. My letter was shorter. It said, Mom, thank you for your letter. I believe it's sincere, and I know how hard it must have been to write. I'm not ready for everything to go back to normal. Honestly, I'm not sure normal was ever healthy for us. But I'm open to trying something new, something honest, something that doesn't require me to be smaller so that other people feel bigger. I want you to keep going to therapy. I want you to understand that my boundaries are not punishments. They're protections for both of us. The sunflowers are beautiful. Grandma would have loved that. I love you too, imperfectly and cautiously, but I do. Jenna. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think there's a version of this story where everything is magically fixed. And I don't want to tell that version, because it wouldn't be true. My mother and I began a very slow, very tentative process of rebuilding. It wasn't a straight line. It was more like a winding path through a forest, where sometimes you can see the sky, and sometimes the trees are so thick you can't see anything at all. We started with phone calls, short ones, once a week, supervised in a way. I always had my therapist's voice in my head, reminding me to maintain boundaries, to speak up when something didn't feel right. to end the conversation if it became toxic. The first few calls were awkward, painfully so. We talked about the weather, about my garden, about her garden, safe subjects, nothing real. But gradually, over weeks, over months, the conversations deepened. My mother started asking questions she'd never asked before. Not, how's work, but, what are you working on? Not, are you seeing anyone, but, what makes you happy right now? She was learning to see me. At age 58, she was learning to see her own daughter for the first time. It was beautiful, and it was painful, and it was infuriating, and it was necessary. My father was a different story. He never apologized. Not in a letter, not in a phone call, not in person. He was present at a few family dinners my mother eventually organized, but he treated the whole situation like a weather event that had passed, something that happened, something regrettable, but not something he was personally responsible for. I've made peace with that. Some people can't apologize. It's not a moral failing so much as a limitation, like being colorblind. They literally cannot see the thing they need to see. My father is colorblind to his own cruelty, and I've stopped waiting for him to see it. Kevin and I don't have much of a relationship. We exchange texts on holidays. He's never acknowledged what happened, never asked for my side of the story, never questioned our parents' behavior. He's still the golden child, orbiting in his own world, and I've stopped trying to enter it. And that's okay, because here's what I've learned, and this took me 32 years and a whole lot of therapy to understand. Family is not an obligation, it's a choice. And you can choose to love people from a distance. You can choose to keep the door open without living in the same room. You can choose to forgive without forgetting. And you can choose yourself without being selfish. Choosing yourself is not selfish. Say that again. Say it out loud wherever you are right now. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. And sometimes it's the bravest thing you'll ever do. I'm 32 now. I still teach art at the same elementary school. I still live in my little craftsman house with the sunflowers. I still paint in my spare room studio, and the work I create there is the most honest, most vulnerable, most alive work I've ever made. The Ruth Kavanagh Art Scholarship is in its third year. We've supported 9 students so far. 3 of them have gone on to win regional art competitions. One of them, Maya, the quiet girl who reminded me of myself, just got accepted into a specialized arts high school. When I told her, she cried, and I held her the way my grandmother used to hold me, and I felt the circle completing. Love passed down, through hands, through words, through sunflowers and bread and quiet mornings, and the stubborn, miraculous act of believing in someone when no one else does. My mother and I see each other about once a month now. It's not the relationship I wished for as a child, but it might be the relationship I need as an adult. One built on honesty instead of performance, on accountability instead of image. She came to my house last month, and she stood in my studio and looked at a painting I'd just finished, a portrait of Grandma Ruth's hands holding a sunflower, and she cried. She really loved you, my mother whispered. She loved you too, Mom. Not the same way. No, not the same way, but she loved you. My mother nodded, and for the first time, I saw something I'd never seen before. Acceptance. not resentment, not jealousy, acceptance. It had taken her over a year of therapy and the near destruction of her family, but she'd finally arrived at the place where she could hold two truths at once. Her mother loved her, and her mother loved me more. And neither of those truths canceled out the other. We had tea that afternoon in my kitchen at the same table, and it was quiet, and it was gentle, and it was real. If you're still listening, and I hope you are, I want to share what this experience taught me. Not because I think I have all the answers, but because sometimes hearing someone else's lessons helps you understand your own. Lesson number 1. Blood does not equal loyalty. I know that's a hard one. I know we're raised in a culture that treats family as sacred, as unquestionable, as a bond that trumps everything. And in many cases, family is beautiful and sacred and worth fighting for. But not always. Not when family becomes a weapon used to control you. Not when family means you're expected to sacrifice your well-being, your boundaries, your inheritance, yourself, for people who wouldn't do the same for you. You do not owe your family your destruction. Full stop. Lesson number 2. Document everything. I know this sounds clinical, unromantic, cold, but hear me. If I hadn't had that camera rolling, if I hadn't recorded those phone calls, if I hadn't saved those texts and emails, my parents' word against mine would have been a battle I might have lost. Not because the truth wasn't on my side, but because the truth, without proof, is just a story. And the other side has a story too. Your proof is what separates your truth from their fiction. Lesson number 3. The people who tell you that you're being too sensitive or too dramatic or too much are almost always the people who benefit from you being less. My whole life I was told to be smaller, quieter, less ambitious, less emotional, less me. And who told me that? The people who needed me to be small so they could feel big. The people who needed me to be quiet so they could control the narrative. The people who needed me to accept less so there was more for them. When someone tells you you're too much, what they're really saying is, you're more than I can handle. And that's their problem, not yours. Lesson number 4. Grief is not a competition. My mother's grief over losing Grandma Ruth was real. I don't doubt that. But she turned her grief into entitlement. The idea that because she was the daughter, her loss was greater, her claim was stronger, her pain was more valid. Grief doesn't work like that. There's no hierarchy. The person who sat by the bedside every night doesn't grieve more correctly than the person who couldn't bring themselves to visit. Grief is personal. It's messy. It's not a zero-sum game. But grief is also not a blank check. You don't get to use your pain as justification for hurting others. Your loss does not give you the right to steal, to manipulate, to threaten. If you're weaponizing your grief, you're not grieving, you're controlling. Lesson number 5, and this is the big one. You are not what your family says you are. You are what you build. For 30 years, I was the other one, Kevin's sister, the quiet girl, the afterthought, the one who needed to try harder, be more, shrink less, or shrink more. The instructions changed depending on the day. But none of that was me. That was their projection of me, their limited, distorted, self-serving projection. The real me? The real me is a teacher who changes kids' lives, an artist who paints with her grandmother's love in every brushstroke, A woman who stood up to the people who were supposed to protect her and said, "No more." The real me is someone my grandmother saw clearly from the very beginning. And I'm done apologizing for her. I visit Grandma Ruth's grave every Sunday. I bring sunflowers, always sunflowers. I sit on the grass next to her headstone and I talk to her. I tell her about the scholarship kids, about Maya, about my paintings, about the bread I baked last week that was almost as good as hers. Almost. Not quite, but I'm getting closer. I tell her about Mom, about the slow, painful, hopeful process of rebuilding something that was never properly built in the first place. She would want to know about that. She would want to know that her daughter is trying, even if she started too late. And sometimes I just sit there in silence, the way we used to sit together on her corduroy couch, reading side by side. A silence that was better than most people's conversations. Last Sunday, I was sitting there, and a butterfly landed on one of the sunflowers I'd placed by her headstone. A monarch butterfly, orange and black and impossibly beautiful. And it sat there for a full minute, wings slowly opening and closing, like it was breathing. And I know that sounds like the kind of thing people make up for stories. But it happened, and I choose to believe it was her. Not because I have proof, but because some things don't need proof. They just need faith. "Hi, Grandma," I whispered. The butterfly lifted off the sunflower, circled my head once, and flew away. And I smiled. Through tears, through grief, through all of it, I smiled. Because she was right about everything, about the bread and the patience and the rising, about the sunflowers and the light, about me. She was right about me. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to say something to you directly, from my heart to yours. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me 80 minutes of your life to hear about the worst and best of mine. This story is for everyone who has ever been the other one in their family, the overlooked one, the quiet one, the one who was told they were too much or not enough, sometimes in the same breath. This story is for everyone who has been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love them the hardest, who has had to build walls against the very people who should have been building bridges. And this story is for everyone who has had a Grandma Ruth, a person who saw you when no one else did, who loved you fiercely and unconditionally, who planted sunflowers in your name and held signs at your graduation and whispered, "You're my masterpiece." If you have that person, call them today. Tell them what they mean to you. Don't wait. Don't assume they know. Tell them. Because one day they won't be there to tell, and you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you'd said it one more time. And if you've lost that person, if your Grandma Ruth is already gone, then honor them. Live the life they saw for you. Use the gifts they gave you. Carry their love forward into the world like a torch that never goes out. That's what I'm trying to do, every day, imperfectly, but trying. Now, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button. I'm serious. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something, if it reminded you of someone, if it gave you strength, hit that button. Because every like tells me that this work matters, that your stories matter, that sharing the hard, ugly, beautiful truth of being human is worth the vulnerability. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a story, because I'm going to keep telling them. Stories of people who were knocked down and got back up, who were told they were nothing and proved they were everything. And comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me your country, your city, your corner of this big, complicated, beautiful world. I read every single comment, every single one. And knowing that someone in Germany or India or Brazil or Nigeria or the Philippines or right down the street is listening to these words and feeling something, that's everything to me. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. You know who they are. The friend who's dealing with toxic family. The sister who's being guilted into giving up what's rightfully hers. The colleague who's always being told she's too sensitive. Share it, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone is show them that they're not alone. Before I go, one last thing. Grandma Ruth used to say, "Life is like bread. You can't rush the rising." Wherever you are in your rising right now, whether you're in the mixing stage or the kneading stage or the painful, boring, seemingly endless waiting stage, don't give up. Don't rush it. Don't let anyone tell you that your bread isn't worth baking. Because what comes out of the oven, it's going to be extraordinary. I promise. This has been Jenna's story. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.